What's up, YouTube? Coming at you with a couple voiceover leagues this morning. I'm starting to feel like Nikachu sometimes. Like, get on here and I do something magic related with my coffee, and I don't know. It's not quite as good as his morning talk shows, but it's a step in that direction, right? So, played a couple leagues off stream last night with Blue Red Murktide, and so I wanted to do voiceover of those leagues. I might play Murktide on stream this week, um, but just kind of showcase some of the gameplay of the deck. Since we also play a lot of like Ragavan, Unholy Heat, Bolt, Iteration style decks, this is just like another perspective of that. And I think we've uploaded one or two Murktide leagues already, but either way, here's a little bit more. One of the reasons I wanted to play Murktide is, for me, I've had a real struggle playing Grixis Shadow, the current iterations of Grixis Shadow. So kind of like this. And in my quest to figure out like what I'm doing wrong, where my lines aren't lining up, what's going on, I want to play a little bit more Murktide, because you do have this same core start of like, all right, I've got Baubles, I've got Channelers, Ragavans, Unholy Heats, Expressive Iteration, Shredder. Maybe I've got Drown in the Lock instead of Counterspell, and like Thoughtseize instead of Spell Pierce. But the rest of the deck is almost identical. So I want to try to figure out like why one of these shells is working for me and the other isn't. So we're going to be going over some of the gameplay here, some of the lines we take, see what happens. It might be better or worse than Grixis Shadow would be, and see where we can improve on the Shadow side. So this is the first league we ran here. List was a little bit different. I had the Blood Moons in the board, no second Fury, no second Subtlety, and had Archmage's Charms in the main, two Archmage's Charms. I did not have the Spyros. I had instead what? What was in the main? Actually, I can tell you real quick. Probably something just like glaringly obvious. The answer is the original had second Mystical Dispute, no Jace, Dress Downs are in the board. There was a Braid. Over the third Fluster. What was the last card in the main? Might have just been fourth Ledger Shredder. Fourth Channeler, fourth Ledger Shredder. Pretty positive that's what it was. I think I just returned the fourth Ledger Shredder. But let's throw it up there for the sake of it. So this is what the original list that I ran looked like. So the first league, this is what you'll be seeing. Pretty stock, whole bunch of 4-ofs, 4 Consider, 4 Channeler, 4 Ragavan, 4 Heat, 4 Iteration, 4 Counterspell, 4 Ledger Shredder. or bobble. So yeah, pretty consistent, pretty straightforward. So let's go ahead and jump into that gameplay, and then we'll be doing a separate video with all of the gameplay of the second league. All right. So this started. Here. All right. Game one, match one, on the play. Good start. Uh, Pretty good opening hand. We've got Ragavan. We've got some interaction. We've got one of our big payoffs. Got a redraw. We can like clear the way out for Ragavan to maybe hit. Opponent reveals a Yorion as their companion. So could be in for a tough time. If they do answer our Ragavan on turn one, we don't really have anything going on. So maybe that's a reason to like mull this hand if we think that Yorion or like a Ren and 6 to Fairy Unholy Heat start, something like that is going to be too much to overcome. But really, it's like turn two Ragavan that really messes up this hand. Or not Ragavan, turn two Ren and 6. But opponent gets a Triome. Picked up this Dragon's Rage Channeler. It's really nice. So let's go ahead and get some bobble value. First thing I noticed the difference between this and Grixis is having access to like Lightning Bolt is just a proactive instant is really nice. So like maybe I want to look at swapping out Lightning Bolts for Fatal Pushes and Grixis. All right. So Ragavan hit Ardent Plea, which means that this is like a 4 or 5 color Rhino list. So we got to keep that in mind. Just like fetching early to get out of a situation where I have to like fight on the stack. I just want to have my fetches out of the way. Since I'm not a shadow deck, I don't care about getting basics for the most part. They go for this fire line. So what I can do is I've got two card types in the yard. I could go for like bolt them, try to get delirium to save my channeler. I could um, I could go for like Unholy Heat on my Ragavan. That gets two card types in the yard and saves the Channeler if they're going to be killing this anyway. One line I thought about kind of after the fact is maybe I should have played the Fiery Islet instead of the Flooded Strand so that I could respond to this with like Lightning Bolt them. And maybe if I scried a Spell Pierce to the top, I could draw into the Spell Pierce and play it. Or I could just like play the Fire Islet, blind crack it, try to hit a counter spell or a spell pierce. So I decided to start with bolt them because if I happen to flip over a creature, like it's more proactive, uh, creature or sorcery, it's more proactive than unholy heating my own Ragavan because I do a little bit of damage to them as well to get the channeler online. And if the bolt misses, and I still can unholy heat my Ragavan, but this also just get some extra cards in the yard so I can play Murktide. Um, which playing the Murktide is going to end up killing the Dragon's Rage Channeler. So I'm kind of just like upgrading a 3/3 to a 4/4. My concern, and I probably could have waited, but my primary concern is just like this channeler's not getting any bigger, the clock's not getting any faster. I don't have any way of stopping anything my opponent does. And this Murktide's a 3-turn clock instead of a 4-turn with the channeler. Uh, what I could have done was pass the turn. If my opponent plays like some sort of cascade spell, I can kill a rhino, get a scry off the channeler, untap, play a Murktide, exile at least one instant or sorcery without losing delirium, and then be able to attack in. And probably would have been better just like not putting all my eggs in the Murktide basket. Or if I was going to put everything on Murktide, I should have unholy heated my channeler first and then played out a 5/5 Murktide instead. So at least it's a 2-turn clock. But either way, this is our position now. Side Odawar is not stopping anything, so I might as well just like take the free fog there. Ice down my Murktide, draw off the fire out just to see if I happen to rip into a counter spell. But we're back up to delirium, so like I'm not feeling too bad here. Take the 5. Okay. So just need like a lightning bolt here. So we unholy heat on our upkeep. Try to get an additional scry out of this channeler. See, no sign of a lightning bolt. So pass to my opponent's turn here in the hopes that I can get them to just like attack with one guy or something and I unholy heat it. They attack with both, so try to fight, but they have the violent outburst to give the other one +1/+0. So sideboarding for game 2. Took out some of the bolts and heats because they're just like not guaranteed to kill rhinos. I'd rather lean on like the engineered explosives out of the board. Boarded in one blood moon on the play. Probably could have gone to the second one, but I wasn't feeling like it was going to be that consistent of a plan. Boarded out. Like Blood Moon's really good against the creativity decks. A lot of these like 4-color Yorion decks, it's a lot less good against. But boarded out one of the Murktide regents because between like Leyline Binding, the possibility of endurance to fairy, uh, stuff like that, they just have a lot of ways of dealing with it. So I really don't want to see multiples. I brought in any like spell pierces, fluster storms, engineered explosives. Uh, what else? The one blood moon. Brought in one of the 2 mystical disputes. All that sort of stuff. So game 2, our hand looks like Channeler Heat Bolt. Very, very underwhelming. Like we've got a threat. We can get land instant in the yard proactively. But we have no way of saying like no or anything. Let's get this game log out here. Game 2 or hand 2 is a bit better. We've got lands. We've got Channeler into a Ledger Shredder. We've got Spell Pierce to stop some rhinos. important thing is just like getting on the board and getting an active presence. So here's Ledger Shredder, get basic island in case we happen to rip the Blood Moon off the top. All right, so Archmage's Charm here is pretty decent. Means I can just get like a little back into it off this mulligan. But with them playing out their third land, I think the last thing I want to do is uh, tap off of some kind of counterspell for Rhinos off of Violent Outburst. So I'm kind of hoping that this like end of turn consider here might bait into a Violent Outburst. Like, oh, he's tapped off counterspell. Let's go for it. And somehow that does work out. So we get Ledger Shredder triggers plus Channeler triggers. Shift the Murktide. It's not getting very big, and I can hold up the Archmage's Charm still. All right. Fourth land is really good, so now I can like play my Consider and stuff, hold up Archmage's Charm. Obviously keeping a Flusterstorm on top. But the important thing is my clock is relevant now. And if I find like a sorcery or an artifact to ditch to the yard, then I can get Dragon's Rage Channeler online. So decide to fight over the Leyline Binding. Maybe this was wrong. This does create a little bit of a tension where now I'm like really committing to fighting over this. But my thought process was okay. I fight over this Leyline Binding. I make this like a 2-turn clock. Rhinos don't do it. They could bounce a dude. That's about like the best play that they've got. And I scry this Spell Pierce to the top. So fortunately, Spell Pierce does not deal with Omnath. And they get it to Fairy. Teferi draws us into the Spell Pierce. So we go for the Spell Pierce on the Teferi. And what does opponent have? Endurance. A little unfortunate, but can't do anything about that. This does just show like how absurd Omnath is at taking a game that we were like so far ahead and just putting us like straight into the dumpster. Like, I know it's not only Omnath into draw to Fairy, but now it's like, oh, Omnath into the Teferi, add Yorion. Now we get to replay Yorion, bounce Omnath, gained a total of 10 life here. 3 land drops, 2 fetches. So put themselves from like dead on board to our 2 flyers. So all of a sudden they're just like way ahead. So that one felt really bad, but what you gonna do? Match number 2, up against Ice 9, notorious red white X land destruction specialist. So to go into this match knowing that that's more than likely what they're playing. And when I say more than likely, I mean like 99.9% guaranteed. Um, I have had the fortune of talking to Ice Nine a couple times in the Grimflayer Discord, and when I say that, like, this is what he does, like, I just cannot express how much that is the truth. This is what he does. He stone rains people out of the game constantly, and it's fantastic. So I think I've played against Iceland like twice before, something like that. I have no idea what my record is. So, but either way, we keep a hand of like Ragavan, Channeler, Counterspell, Heat, which I'd keep this hand in the draw against like literally anything. But having a Ragavan against the land destruction deck is pretty positive. Uh, the untapped Sacred Foundry makes me think either a uh, a mana tithe or like a lightning bolt, unholy heat, something like that. And I really don't want to play out my Ragavan into one of those answers. So instead, I'm just going to pass. And when they pass back, I assume again it's just like two pieces of one mana interaction. So instead, I'm going to hold up counter spell, try to hit like the turn 3 land destruction spell, and then drop a Ragavan or something next turn. So a little bit of matchup fortune. And this is where I messed up for sure. Uh, I've got land drops to make, and I've got counter spells, and I've got redraws if they don't have anything. And I think I got a little complacent's not the word. Impatient, because I decided to dash this Ragavan. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna make Stone Rain a bad card. Stone Rain, Boom Bust, Molten Rain, whatever. Like, I'm gonna have plenty of mana. And he drops down a Haktos. Huh. Protection from mana values other than 4, you say. Um, how many 4 drops do I have in the main deck? None. How many 4 drops do I have in the sideboard? 1. So I cannot get Haktos off the battlefield. It is there. It is forever. So now my plan becomes, okay, if they start swinging, maybe I Archmage's Charm, draw some cards. I can find like some lightning bolts, help get Channeler online, and like maybe we can raise. Not a great plan, but the only plan I got. Goes for the double lightning bolt on me, which is a pretty good play out of them to recognize that like I can't deal with Haktos. So they're just gonna like fire off everything they got at me. My only answer would be like if I had a main deck subtlety or something, which obviously I don't. So we're gonna scoop it up and go to game number 2. Sideboarding. Took out a whole bunch of these lightning bolts and unholy eats and stuff. Um, little bit of deck knowledge. I don't think they play Ragavan or anything like that. I think the only creatures are usually like outside of Haktos. I've seen like Magus of the Tabernacle. Um, but usually it's like just Haktos. So I'm not worried about like early channelers or ragavans or anything like that. So lightning bolt, unholy heat gets a lot worse. Boarding in like any counter spell I have, fluster storm, mystical dispute, spell pierce, uh, even like 3 mana spell pierce answers a 4 mana hack dose. So we'll take it. Blood Moon's pretty bad when they're going to be blowing up all my basics anyway. Braid pretty bad. Like all of their hate, I think, is enchantment based. Like Rest in Peace, Ghostly Prison. Uh, what's it called? The activated abilities are two more. Can't think of the name. Beside the point. Uh, stuff like that's all enchantment based. I've seen like Trinisphere and stuff out of these lists, but I'm hoping I've got like a cheap counter spell to answer a Trinisphere and don't need a card that's dead against literally everything else in the deck. Brought in the subtleties and the furies for two reasons. One, subtlety could answer like a hack dose on the stack. They also could randomly roll into 4. Same thing with Fury. They could randomly roll into 5, and I get some sort of out. And the fact that they're just threats. So if I counterspell a couple like Stone Rain effects and just drop down a Fury, then there's a reasonable chance it could just go the distance. But either way. Ledger Shredder, Counterspell, Murktide. Again, not the most exciting hand in the world, but I've got threats, I've got interaction. All I need to do is find like more interaction. I know I don't have to worry about drawing dead lightning bolts or unholy heats or something. So any non-land card I draw is likely to be a counter spell or a threat. And I'm kind of okay with either of those things. Throw down the Ledger Shredder here. If they got the Manatide, that's fine. Because after this, like, I'm going to be holding up counter spells basically every single turn. So this was like the turn off that I could drop down that Ledger Shredder. And we are not going to throw an Archmage's Charm into a potential Manatide because I think these are just going to be super, super important for making sure that I keep the cards up in my hand. Make sure even if they Stone Rain me or whatever, I'm still hitting land drops. Which is why I decided to draw there instead of countering. Like, if they miss their 4th land drop and this is just turn 3, Stone Rain my Spire Bluff Canal, that's fine. I've got a backup land. I've still got like counter spells and charms and stuff. But I'll keep my mana at a reasonable level and be able to find threats. So they've got a hack dose on top, so I'm going to swing in with Ragavan to get that off. Say goodbye to hack dose, still hold up Archmage's Charm counterspell. All right. So boom, I'm kind of interested in countering. And the fact that I get to eat this Mana Tithe too is just kind of a bonus. All right, so Ragavan sees Ghostly Prison. Drop Channeler down so I can hold up Counterspell and Spell Pierce. And we find the Hack Dose. So get that out of the way. Get our Channeler Scry. Bend over that Shredder because all I really am interested in now is any sort of counter magic. Everything else is pretty whatever at this point. Hold up Charm and Spell Pierce. another hack dose. We're going to counter that, and they scoop up that game. So we are on to game 3. All right. Opening hand. Got lands. Whole bunch of counter spells. Got Ragavan. If Ragavan's able to survive, this hand gets a lot better. If Ragavan doesn't survive, then we're still not in like bad shape. So we bobble them. See Arid Mesa. Decide to just go for the Ragavan just to get a spell out of their hand. Like if they mana tithe it, then I know these counter spells are looking a lot better. If they don't, if they just like bolt it or something, that's fine. Because like starting turn 2, I'm not tapping off counter spell anyway. So it would be like turn 4 before I played the Ragavan. It's like I'm not dashing the Ragavan on turn 3 so that if they just like answer it, I can't counterspell or Archmage's Charm. So I'm probably not hard casting the Ragavan again until turn 4. So this is just like make them have the bolt now. And then I do think on the draw, even though I've got lands, I think countering this turn 3 land destruction spell is pretty important, because if I don't, then now on turn 4 things start to really snowball. Now they might have like another Stone Rain plus a mana tithe for my counter spell or something similar. And if I don't keep up on tempo and not lose to mana tithe, then I run the issue of them just going like turn 4, Stone Rain plus tithe, turn 5, something, turn 6 or something like Haktos plus mana tithe. And I'm just not going to be able to deal with that. So I kind of have to have a little bit of top deck luck. Which is also why I'm like not using the counter that taps me all the way out. I just do not want to get mana tithed out here. My mana is already pretty constrained. So it looks like a hack dose. I've just been playing with this extra land up pretty aggressively. So I'm assuming that they've got a copy of Mana Tithe. If they want a Mana Tithe, consider that's a-okay. See a Molten Rain off the top. So let's Expressive Iteration. Just try to keep hitting land drops. Drop down this Murktide while it's safe from tithe. And luckily, outside of like another Vindicate, they really don't have a lot of ways of getting Murktide off the board. And it looks like they just, didn't have an answer for Murktide. So I had Vindicate covered with the Flusterstorm if they tapped off of something. But either way, an 8/8 Murktide, pretty tough to deal with. So I think that was game number 3, right? Pretty positive. But either way, 1-1 going into match number 3. On the draw. Another reasonable opening hand. Got Ragavan. Got a way to clear the way for Ragavan. Got some lands, redraws. Spirebluff Canal Chandler, so it looks like we're in a mirror match. All right, ledger shredder on top. It's got an answer for our Ragavan. All of them see a polluted delta, so we get a couple new cards here. All obviously pretty solid cards. So let's fight over the shredder, see if they got the spell pierce, which they do. Which you kind of figured they did after last turn. They unholy heated and kept one up instead of like playing the shredder. But since that counter spell in the fetch land there gave us delirium, we'll just go ahead and take out that ledger shredder. We could take out the Dragon's Rage channeler as well, but I think holding up the counter spell for a potential Murktide here is a little bit better. The hope kind of is if they do just go to jam a Murktide here, it would be a 6/6 with only 3 instants and sorceries. So if they have like Murktide counterspell, we counterspell the Murktide, they counterspell our counterspell, resolve Murktide, we can untap and just like unholy heat the Murktide and play our own. But if they're not counterspelling this iteration, then I feel like there's a reasonable chance that they just don't have a counterspell. Could play out our Murktide as a 6/6, but when I've got like a whole bunch of really good instants and sorceries in the hand, then I don't think it makes a lot of sense to not just like wait until we can play it out as an 8/8. Looks like this is in fact the Murktide. Uh, they didn't delve away these 3 instants, so that's like immediate. Oh, they've got another Murktide. Cool. But it doesn't really matter. Like, I've got the Murktide pretty well covered, so go ahead and lightning bolt away that channeler. Play my Murktide. Take out instant and sorcery so that now I can counterspell, get back to delirium, and have unholy heat. And there is the other Murktide. We'll just go ahead and counterspell that. Ragavan of our own. So let's dash this Ragavan, see if we can get them to block, which they do. So that's just like free removal spell. Save our unholy heat for the next threat. They don't have delirium, so they've got little to no way of actually getting our Murktide off the board. And in my limited experience in the mirror, this kind of seems to be the case. Like you talk about in the shadow mirror all the time, that the first person to attack with a shadow is often the one that loses, because if we've both got a shadow and you attack with yours first, then now mine is bigger than yours if I just like take the damage and don't die. And usually that's enough to like put my shadow into abyss mode. So now every time I attack, you have to block or you die. And with the Murktide mirrors, it seems like more often than not, the first person to tap out for a Murktide is the one that's at a severe disadvantage because now you might be like tapping off of Delirium, which is huge when Unholy Heat answers like everything in the matchup except for Murktide itself. You make Dragon's Rage Channeler a lot worse. Like just a whole bunch of snowballing there. But if y'all have opinions on the mirror, please share them. I'm in no way an expert. So sideboarding on the draw, board out like all the Dragon's Rage Channelers. Goes between Lightning Bolt, Unholy Heat, Unlicensed Hearse. There's just a lot of good ways of answering it. Board out 2 of the 4 Ragavans. On the draw, they're significantly worse because your opponent's like Ledger Shredders, Ragavans of their own, Unholy Heat Bolt, all answer. A Murktide stands in front of it. Board out an Unholy Heat because I'm expecting them to have a lot of Grave Hate, like Unlicensed Hearse. And then board out a Murktide Regent for kind of the same reason. That was the other card in this list. I'm not running 4 Shredder. I'm running 3 Shredder and 3 Murktide. So I boarded out the 3rd Murktide. So if they have like a bunch of Grave Hate, I'm not just drawing a bunch of those. Boarded in like Fluster Storms, Mystical Disputes, Fury and, or not Fury, Subtlety to answer an opposing Murktide on the stack. Boarded in a Braid, the 2 Unlicensed Hearses. Yeah, all that stuff. So, a little risky. Like, it's a 1-lander with a bobble on the draw. But I've just got so many really good cards in the matchup. Like, I've got a Hearse, got Ledger Shredder, Counterspell, Heat for a 1-drop. Like, hand's kind of stacked as long as I can find a couple more lands pretty quickly. So we see Fiery Islet. I kind of decide there that I could Unholy Heat on turn 1, on my turn 1, and get a random draw into the Fire Islet. But I go for the Scry. I kind of decide that finding the land is more important than killing the Ragavan on my turn. So since I find the land, I can go for the Unholy Heat on their upkeep. If they've got the Spell Pierce, then that's like unfortunate, but I would rather just like make sure I'm hitting the second land drop as opposed to getting overly aggressive about killing the Ragavan. Like, I think if I kill the Ragavan, that's a positive. I think if I don't hit the land drop, I lose. So I'm going to err on the side of the long game. But we do hit some land drops, so we're just going to slam this Hearse. Ledger Shredder ultimately is like annoying, but one more card type in the yard like Ragavan, and I can Unholy Heat it. So I'm not too afraid. Right there. Obviously, hindsight, I probably should have unlicensed Hearse in response to the Consider to stop this exact scenario of, hey, they have 5 cards in the graveyard, they hit their 3rd land. But if this were just like a non-fetch land, then they'd be able to play a Murktide right now. But since it is a fetch land, call coming in. Okay. Do respond to the fetch with the unlicensed Hearse, taking out a couple of these instants. But yeah, I should have responded to the Consider itself. Honestly, I wasn't thinking about the Consider binning a card. Like, I was just thinking, oh, Consider goes to the yard, they find a land, they've got 4 cards, 2 lands. It would have to be a fetch land, they'd have to crack. I could respond to that. No, Consider could bend whatever card they see, and they could have Murktide if I don't respond appropriately. So could have been a punt there. But this unlicensed hearse will do a really good job of keeping like Dragon's Rage Channeler, Unholy Heat in check. And unless they're able to find a what's it called? An abrade, they're probably not getting it off the board. All right. So kind of the same thing as game one. If they have a spell pierce, it's an awkward situation for me because what I want to do is I know this Ledger Shredder is resolving unless they have spell snare, which is pretty narrow. Um, but I know Ledger Shredder is resolving, and I want to Unholy Heat target this Ledger Shredder so that we both connive. I discard Ragavan. That gives me Delirium to take out their Ledger Shredder. I could wait until their turn, but then it opens it up to like counter spell. And I'd rather just like make them have the spell pierce right now instead of give them a chance to have a counter spell on their turn. But they have in fact found the spell pierce. So go ahead and knock a couple card types out of the yard. Make sure we're keeping them off of Delirium pretty aggressively. If they're attacking with this Shredder, it could be that it's just a free attack and I can't do anything about it. Could also be that they have an Unholy Heat. So I'm kind of erring on the side of I think they have Unholy Heat. I'm going to get to untap with a whole bunch of counter spells. So there's that Spell Pierce, grows Shredder up above Murktide. We'll just go ahead and take that nuisance off the board. They're going to ditch a couple cards. We're not wanting an unlicensed hearse to resolve. So keeping Murktide, but really I just want to hit like land drops or action spells, which is most of my deck, but there's a couple things I'd like to scry off the top. Another Shredder is annoying but fine. Like I'm gonna have the Murktide on my turn, so I know I'm gonna have like the biggest thing on board. This is something that I'm trying to get better of as well, stacking triggers with channelers and shredders. So if you have nothing in hand, it's usually better to put the channeler triggers on the stack first, resolve the ledger shredder triggers first, so that you're just drawing and discarding whatever's on the top. And then you get to surveil with the Dragon's Rage channelers and like filter that next draw step. If you put the shredder triggers on the stack first and resolve the channeler first, you have a better chance of putting 1/1 counters on your shredders by like filtering live spells to the top. But then you have no control over that next draw that actually goes and stays in your hand. So it's like channeler first or resolve channeler first if you want aggression, like growing your shredders. Resolve shredder first if you want control and you want to have a better idea of what that top draw that you're going to draw into is going to be. All right, so they go ahead and crack this bauble, which does give them delirium, means that these Dragon's Rage channelers have to attack. So I do have to take a few points here, but I get to get one of these channelers off the board. So go to blocks, exile them off of delirium. Just like pop this out. Uh, Trying to exile as much stuff as I can to keep Delirium while making this Murktide an 8/8. And my only plan now is like I'm counterspelling uh I'm counterspelling an Unholy Heat on the Ledger Shredder, and that's probably about it. But obviously, only if they have Delirium, and likelihood of them having Delirium while I've got this unlicensed hearse out is pretty low. But I just kind of want to stall the board until I'm able to get like hearse big enough to be a one shot, or hearse plus Regent to be a one shot, and I get another creature on board. So they go for this Unholy Heat. They do not have Delirium. So we're just going to let them deal 2 damage here and say, cool. Kept a card on top with Dragon's Rage Channeler. Now with this bauble, I get to see what it is. And this is where we're going to start trying to turn the corner a little bit. I've got this unlicensed hearse to make sure that they can't like get Delirium and attack in for a big chunk. I'm probably pretty aggressively counterspelling this Consider. It's their last card in hand. So the last thing I want them to do is hit another live spell, like double connive their shredders. So eat some stuff, draw some cards. And subtlety is a pretty good pickup here. I could play subtlety, animate hearse, attack in with Murktide and the hearse, and they would have to block like Channeler on hearse, Shredder on Murktide, and I'd be in like a pretty good position. But I think I kind of want to just like sit on subtlety and flusterstorm here. So if they play any threat at all, I'm probably just like windmill slamming subtlety, even if it's just like a Ragavan or another channeler or something. Um, if they play like an expressive iteration, then I likely just cast the flusterstorm, make them pay the other 2, and then they can try to play something with like 1 mana available, maybe. Um, Other than that, I don't think there's a lot of live draws they really have. But regardless, that is the mirror. Now on to round number 4. All right. Again, fair opening hand. We're against the Yorion deck. This hand's not as great against Yorion. We don't have any sort of early pressure, but I do just have like a Spell Pierce, maybe for a turn 2 Wrenn and 6. Got a couple redraws with a Scry. So I'm not like upset about it. Obviously, a hand with like a Ragavan or a Channeler, Ledger Shredder, something would probably be a little bit better. All right. So, thought process here. My original plan is I want to Spell Pierce or Wrenn and 6. I think that's something that I'm like fairly aggressively interested in. Uh, so if I want to scry off the Mishra's Bauble in the Misty Rainforest, I need to crack the bauble on my turn. But that means that if I see something I don't want, I'd have to like fetch and shock or fetch out a basic on their turn. And that might say, like, scream, oh, he's got Spell Pierce. So I want to hold up the bauble if I can. And then they play the Hallowed Fountain, which means they can't play a turn 2 Wrenn and 6. So instead, I decide to just play the Misty and the bauble and pass and use the Scry on their instep. see a Spire Bluff Canal, which is fine, but like I've got this considered too. I think I'm gonna have a fine time hitting land drops. So I decided to just like ditch the Spire Bluff Canal and then happen to draw in or happen to see the polluted delta off the consider anyway. But even if I didn't, I would have if I bottomed the polluted delta or didn't see a land there, I'd still have like the draw off the consider, untap draw for turn, play my land, next turn draw. I've got the expressive iterations. Like I don't think I'm too worried about hitting land drops. Play out Ragavan here. Really just want to hold up Spell Pierce for like a Planeswalker. And now I might have the chance to Spell Pierce it to Fairy. And then a lot of the times that I don't stack like a Polluted Delta, it's mostly because I don't want to get into a spot where I'm losing on the stack. Like I know they're not playing Rhinos because they've got Unholy Heat, but I don't want to like stack this Polluted Delta and then respond with like Eladomri's Call or something like that. And I don't think there's a big drawback to waiting. That's Finquaddle's fine. Come on. All right. Then here, I think we're just going for draw a couple cards with this Archmage's Charm. So there used to be a bit of a not rule. I guess it's kind of a rule of thumb. Uh, but it's like in control mirrors, usually countering the draw spells isn't worth it. Because like there's always going to be more draw spells, more draw steps. You want to counter like the interactive things or the things that are going to get you dead, the things that are going to kill you, or the things that are going to stop you from killing your opponent. And Archmage's Charm right there, like, doesn't really do either of those things. So it seems like a bit of an aggressive counter. Main deck, Kaya's Guile. Okay, then. But on the bright side, if their Kaya's Guile is just like exile my yard, make a 1/1 flyer. Cool. That is in fact something a Kaya's Guile is allowed to do. But ultimately, like I'm not too afraid of an Ice Fang and a Spirit Token. Kind of surprised that they didn't just get like a snow-covered forest there to get this Ice Fang Coatl closer to being online. But each their own. Omnath, we will absolutely counterspell. I believe it falls into the category of something that kills me or something that stops me from killing them. So, all right. Sequencing. So, I lightning bolt first there. For one, I lightning bolt instead of unholy heat because if I get delirium again, I want to be able to unholy heat an Omnath. Second, I lightning bolt first so that I scry or surveil with this shredder before consider resolves. So I have a better idea of like what I'm looking for off of this. So we're just gonna ditch like the extra Murktide. We're ways off of that mattering. Counterspell looks like a fine draw. And then Ledger Shredder's racing the spirit token, so I'm fine getting a little aggressive here. But if I'd cast like the consider first, then I would be having to make that choice on the consider before I knew everything that was in my hand. So I'd be like unholy heating and conniving with a card in my hand that I don't know I want. Because I just like got it off the consider. Which obviously, if I hit something like a counter spell, then I'm probably keeping it regardless. But I think I would have hit. What would I have hit? No, consider would have seen counter spell, and then the connive would have hit unholy heat. Sounds right. Or no, connive. Consider would have hit unholy heat. Bend it. Drew counter spell. Connive. I don't know. I don't remember. Some cards, somewhere, some effects, blah blah blah. So opponent adds Yorion to their hand and then just like swings in with their spirit token. We're gonna take out here. And this is more just to add another instant to the yard so that I can get down Murktide. I feel like Murktide plus Counterspell gives me a reasonable chance here. Another Kaya's Guile. I could have just let this go and like sack the Ledger Shredder because the Murktide Regent's still just a 2-turn clock. I don't care about the actual Yorion. So if they play Yorion, then I'm just attacking into it 3 times. And then they would be adding a creature to my yard to get me closer to Delirium. I've got instants I could cast. But I kind of decide, like, hey, I'm getting a connive off of this. They're playing into Spell Pierce. Why not? And then that Terra Sunder means I'm pretty glad I took the line of um, Spell Piercing the Kaya's Guile because they just had answers for everything. Then I kind of want to keep my threats a little long or keep my threats around as long as I can. All right. So oh yeah, they prismatic ending, and you might have seen they had a red floating. They didn't pay the second mana for prismatic ending, so my Ledger Shredder just kind of lived. They basically ending for 1. Uh, it it matters, but it doesn't matter. And the reason for that is if they had killed my Ledger Shredder, then I could just like bolt them here, play a 6/6 Murktide, and they would have like one draw step here to find an answer to the Murktide. I know that they've got Yorion in hand and Unknown. This would not have answered Murktide, so I would have a Murktide on the board with double counter spell. They'd play a Yorion. I'd say, cool, I'm going to attack you with a Murktide. But here instead, the Ledger Shredder Connive means we can ditch the Murktide, counterspell the Yorion, makes our Ledger Shredder a 4/6 off the Connive, so we can just untap and bolt. So kill you, untap, lightning bolt you, attack. All right, so that was game number 1. and really showed like a lot of grind potential out of the Murktide deck, which is one of the reasons I've wanted to get more games in with it. Sideboarding against the Yorion pile. Took out like some bolts and heats. Don't kill Omnath. Don't kill Yorion. They can kill the Ice Fang Coatls, but so feels bad. Keeping in a couple unholy heats because if I have Delirium, they do kill everything. Board in the mystical disputes, subtlety, board out a Murktide because they showed us Kaya's Guile, Tear Asunder. They have a lot of ways of answering Murktide. So kind of like the match a couple matches ago, if our opponent just has a ton of ways of dealing with it, I don't think it's worth leaning too heavily on. So boarded in like a couple mystical disputes, the 2 blood moons, and the 2 dress downs. Kind of went like that. All right. So opening hand, got a lot of good interaction. We've got Blood Moon. So let's see what happens. Now we've got the lands to be able to Blood Moon with a couple of basic islands. This was kind of a funny turn here. So my opponent goes for an Abundant Growth, which they shocked in the Steam vents to be able to cast the Abundant Growth. And my assumption is they have like another Abundant Growth, but instead they Flusterstorm my Spell Pierce. So now my thought is, okay, they're just doing like everything they can to play around Blood Moon. So if that makes my Blood Moon itself a lot worse, then so be it. And the Unmoored Ego. I don't know. All right, 2 things. One, they found the basic forest. So Blood Moon's like dead now, which is crazy to think about against a 4-color deck. Like, hey, it's turn 3 and Blood Moon does nothing. They've got 2 just like lands that do whatever they want them to do, or 1 rainbow land and 1 basic plus the mountain under the Blood Moon. So like, you're dead. You might as well be a bit like big dead piece of cardboard in hand. Whatever. Second thing, Unmoored Ego. My gut feeling is they want to name Murktide. Like, it's just best card in my deck. I have no idea why you want to, or why you think you need to board in Unmoored Ego in your deck that just showed me Kaya's Guile, Tear Asunder. I'm assuming if you're getting like Indatha Triumph Steam Vents that you probably have Leyline Binding. There's a reasonable likelihood of Teferi or Solitude. I just can't imagine a world where Murktide is a card you just really care about. But whatever. I don't have threats. I need threats. So I'm going to counter that in the off chance that I get to find a threat. Get the Blood Moon down. I know it doesn't do a whole lot, but the hope was that with the limited color sources here, they might not be able to like Teferi and bounce it right away, or they need another land for Leyline Binding. But instead, they just have another Abundant Growth. So perfect mana. Yeah, so like Teferi following up the Unmoored Ego makes me think maybe they had or wanted to name like Blood Moon with Ego. Because again, with like Teferis and stuff in your deck, you just don't care about Murktide region. It just doesn't do anything to you. Consider here pretty aggressively trying to find like unholy heat. And I'm pretty aggressively trying to attack down Teferi, because if I don't kill Teferi, my hand does nothing. Like, they've got answer to my Murktide. I can't hold up counter spells. But the only way they could get down to Fairy that turn was if they had another copy of Unmoored or Abundant Growth or like a basic Plains. So I'm not like upset about the Blood Moon play. I think I had a chance to slam it, slammed it. Obviously, they had a hand that was very, very anti Blood Moon. But that's how it goes. So on to game 3. Changed up the sideboard plan a little bit, took the Blood Moons out. Like, obviously, they are prepared to not lose to Blood Moon, which, again, regardless of what you think should or should not be legal in the format, I do not agree that 4-color and 5-color pile decks should be able to play through Blood Moon so easily. But whatever. Board out, address down, board in a couple copies of Flusterstorm. I probably should have done it game 2 when I saw like Terra Sunder, Kaya's Guile, Prismatic Ending stuff game 1. But I'm really more worried about like all the Planeswalkers than I am the spells. And since Flusterstorm doesn't deal with the Planeswalkers, I was a little hesitant on those. Everything else pretty much the same. I think I boarded in like the Fury and what was the other thing? Fury and no idea. Some card. But the important thing is I was just getting Blood Moons out of the deck game 3. Like, the hope is that they just kind of fetch suboptimally, play around Blood Moon. So opponent molds to 6. Pretty good opening hand on our side. We've got like the turn 1 Channeler in the Bauble, turn 2 Spell Pierce for a Wrenn and 6, turn 3 Mystical Dispute for a Teferi, and hope to find some more stuff by then. I decided to keep the Flooded Strand on top. Gives me land in the yard towards Delirium. And I wonder if I was supposed to hold up Spell Pierce on turn 1 to try to hit like Abundant Growth. But I kind of figured that since I don't have Blood Moon in the deck, that I don't really need to fight over that. I'd rather, like I said, save Spell Pierce for like Wrenn and 6 on 2. I'm also trying to get better about like not slamming Expressive Iteration when I don't need to. Because usually I'm pretty big about like, okay, I'm untapping on my turn 3. Let me Iteration before I play a land drop. But more often than not, that leads me to like Iteration, getting a land and a spell because, hey, I want value off my Iteration. So let me exile a land, put a spell in hand when I just like have a land anyway and don't need to Iteration there to find a land drop. So that's certainly something I need to get better about with Shadow. So Prismatic Endings, fine. I get to resolve this, or hopefully resolve this Archmage's Charm. If they want to fight over this, then I'm still like up on cards. If they don't want to fight over this, then cool. So not hitting a land here is really rough. But decide to tap out for the Dragon's Rage Channeler because I found the subtlety. So I can like fight over an Omnath on the stack or a Teferi or something. Which them Leyline binding my Dragon's Rage Channeler is like, thank you. Appreciate that greatly. And then they decide to take the initiative to play an Unmoored Ego. Again, see what they name. They do, in fact, name Murktide, which I boarded one of the 3 out anyway. But again, I do not think this is a card that should come in from their side. Like I said, we've seen Leyline Binding, Kaya's Gal, Teferi Time Reveler. Haven't seen Solitude, but I kind of assume if you're playing a 5-color pile deck with Omnath, you're probably playing Solitude. But either way, just like a whole bunch of ways of dealing with Murktide. So that's kind of whatever. And it's also like a card down in their hand that doesn't affect my hand at all, doesn't affect the board at all. All right, so just like last turn, decide to go ahead and like be okay tapping out because I can hold up the subtlety, but I want to find land drops like aggressively, which is kind of the same reason I just decided to go for this Ragavan here. I don't think holding up Mystical Dispute does anything that subtlety can't, outside of like being able to fight over 2 things. So if they like play land to fairy, hold up Counterspell or something, then hold up Mystical Dispute and subtlety would have been able to deal with that, but they don't, so whatever. All right, and here we'll subtlety, get rid of Spell Pierce, because Spell Pierce is getting really dead really quickly. And then this is kind of an interesting one. So they put the Teferi on top. They know about this Unholy Heat. It's not like an, oh my god, he's got Unholy Heat. So I'm not really sure if putting the Teferi on top was the right plan. Then bounce the Leyline Binding to try to hit a land drop. Plus, if they decide to Leyline Binding again and like take Teferi, then I'm just up a threat. So I assume they're just going to retake one of my threats, which is fine. Like nothing's changed except I drew a card. And obviously all this is fine with me. Like Leyline Binding my Ragavan, sure. Like, hey, I still have a Teferi. I still have threats and counter spells. And we are all Gucci, as the kids would say. The important thing is I have no intention of letting a Yorion resolve. And as long as I protect Teferi, then I don't really have to worry about a Yorion resolving. So see an Unholy Heat on top of their library. Otawara is reasonable. They don't have Delirium, so they can't kill anything. So I'm just going to Otawara the Leyline Binding with my Ragavan. So I can get another attack in, get some more mana. Maybe get another card off their library to cast. Like, I kind of figure that my bottleneck right now is just mana. Like, I've got interaction for days. So all I want to do is be able to cast it, which is kind of why we go for the Otawara on the Leyline Binding there. I could have just gone to my turn and like played the Otawara, would have been fine, but This just gives me like another threat that they have to deal with. Uh, Chalice of the Void, really an interesting bring in, and your Unholy Heat, Prismatic Ending, mostly on one deck, but whatever. So just gonna like fire off the Spell Pierce. I'm fully expecting them to just pay for this Spell Pierce. But after Spell Pierce resolves, like I don't care. Or after Chalice resolves, I don't care about Spell Pierce. I don't care about Chalice. They've got an Unholy Heat in hand. So maybe there's an argument that they were just trying to get me to counter the Chalice so that they could get Delirium to cast the Unholy Heat. I could buy that. But again, here, my only goal is to protect this Teferi. Because I think if I've got Teferi out, then a lot of their really good plays just kind of go out the window. So they do play Solitude. So like all these cards in the deck that deal with Murktide, I still cannot for the life of me think why they need Unmoored Ego. I also forget to tick up Teferi here, but I don't think it really matters because like I know they've got Yorion, so that's 5 of their 7 mana, and I've got a Mystical Dispute, and then they've got 2 more mana to deal with 2 threats. So I guess technically that deals with 2 threats. So let's draw a couple cards. Keep the Channeler. That's what we like to call a lethal body. Draw a card. Iteration. Like I get that I've drawn 2 cards off Teferi. So it's not like this is only only the Murktide deck doing any sort of value game here, but still, once you get to these late spots and your top decks are just like, oh, here's iterations into draw spells and baubles off my channeler to find counter spells. You just never really feel like you're running out of gas. So I know they've got Yorion Unknown. I still have bad mana leak up in Mystical Dispute. Can't fight over anything in the stack because of Teferi, so yeah. They're only out there would be like another copy of Leyline Binding for the Channeler, but that taps them out completely, gets all the cards out of hand. So all I really need to do is like untap, play Fury, take up Teferi, say go, and they got to beat like Flusterstorm Dress Down. So that is game number 3. So we are currently 3-1 going into the last round of this league. Make sure this is the right one. Yep. All right. So opening hand, another Yorion opponent. We're on the play, so like opening hand's a little bit better on the play than it would be on the draw. We'll roll with it. Opponent mulligans. We've got threats. We've got a proactive instant. Archmage's Charms, reasonable. Like turn 2 to Fairy can, or turn 2 Ren and 6 can really wreck this hand. The Garden, I think more often means like creativity or zoo than it means Omnath pile. I don't think the Omnath decks usually play the Jetmir's Garden. But Spell Pierce looks like a reasonable card here, so we're just gonna try to get some scries going. Don't know what they're on yet. Jetmir's Garden into Xander's Lounge. This makes me think creativity because both of these are mountains. But I don't think I've seen like any Yorion creativity lists. And then they play Beseiju that's not a mountain, so I have no idea. And then they play the Dryad, so now I know it's Scapeshift. Such a fun time in Modern when you like your opponent plays 3 lands, reveals a Yorion, and you still have like no idea what they're possibly on. All right, so let's Spell Pierce it to Fairy. Been the Consider. So I want to keep the Consider, but I don't want to keep the Consider without a land drop. So, of course, we find the Consider anyway. And we got a little fortunate there to like flip over Delirium with the Murktide Regent and the Expressive Iteration. And then we just like find Counter Spell, which is best possible draw there. We could Counter Spell. We could let the Omnath resolve and then Unholy Heat it. All roads lead to the same result. Probably better to let it resolve and heat it if we think that they've got something else they can do this turn that keeps them alive. But either way, like it's better if we think that they're going to go like basic mountain lightning bolt to channeler. It would be better to Unholy Heat. But ultimately, I don't think it's too big of a deal either way. Sideboarding, bring in Blood Moons, board out a Murktide because I saw like Teferi and stuff, and I'm assuming they're on Leyline Binding when they showed Jetmir Garden into Xander's Lounge. Board out some of these things that don't kill like Dryad or Omnath. Same thing with Unholy Heat. Like I'm more interested in counterspelling payoffs than I am killing them after they resolve. Bring in Flusterstorms, Mystical Disputes. Kind of treat a lot of these 4 or 5 color pile decks the same. Opening hand's reasonable. Got interaction, got counterspell, more draws, got a threat. So let's roll with it. I'm pretty sure Blood Moon out of these decks is like a known quantity at this point. Like out of the Murktide deck, I can't think of anybody that's playing against Murktide a decent bit and not expecting Blood Moon out of the sideboard. So usually I try to be a little bit concealing by not like fetching up basic island too early. But I don't think it's something that anybody's like not playing around at this point. So here I'm just kind of thinking with like a bunch of mana open, even if I top deck a Blood Moon, it's probably pretty dead. So I'm just not going to rely on it too much. So Omnath is going to catch a counter spell. Little fortunate that they didn't have like a Mystical Dispute, Flusterstorm, Veil of Summer, one of, I'm sure, 75 other options. But I'm kind of hoping that like my fetch pattern here will make them think that I don't have Blood Moon in the deck. Like, I'm not in a great spot for game 2 because they just have a live Valakut or getting close to a live Valakut. But I'm kind of hoping with like game 3, maybe they just won't play around it. It's like not the perfect plan, but I don't have a lot of options really. So let's get down our other Shredder. I was really expecting that to be fourth Omnath or third Omnath, but get the Unholy Heat down. And I'm trying to get better about sequencing Expressive Iteration 2. Just like what I want to put in hand, what I want to put in exile when it comes to like Ledger Shredder, Connives. I think I decided to bin. No, kept Ragavan on top. Fire and Ice is fine. Kind of the goal right here is I just want to interact with like a Scapeshift. If they have Dryad plus Scapeshift, unfortunate for me. Then I'm really only Flusterstorming here because they're doing this on my upkeep, and I get the free Surveil before my draw step. If they had done it on my, if they had done that on my draw or after my draw, like during combat, I probably would have just let the Fire and Ice go. Also, should have kept the Flusterstorm and ditched the Steam Vents. I was not thinking about the treasure token off of Ragavan. So all I was thinking was like, oh, if I find I need this third land to cast Blood Moon, when I could have just kept an extra live card in hand. But live and learn. So wish here. I'm guessing they wished for Bajuka Bog and like thought it would trigger before it turned into a mountain, but oh well. That's how it goes sometimes. So yeah, ultimately a nice little 4-1 league. I think that this deck is extremely consistent, very, very powerful. I'm looking forward to playing some more matches with it. Probably, like I said, going to be streaming it pretty quickly. The other version I tried out, and I'll have a league up of that, had Blood Moon in the main, so we'll see how that goes. But hopefully you catch that video and enjoy the voiceover. And otherwise, have an awesome day. Adios for now.